Hello everybody and welcome to this video by me, Adam Steele. This is the Blackstar Unity U700 Elite. This bass amp was sent to me this week by Blackstar and it's an absolute monster. I am very impressed. So stick with us while we check out all the features because this thing can do a lot. Now, full disclosure, Blackstar have sent me this amp to review. They've not paid me to do this video. My opinions are, of course, my own. This amp can do a lot, and I am seriously impressed with the range that it has. I've been using it for a couple of hours with a couple of different basses, and I've got to the point where my fingers are kind of sore because I couldn't stop playing, and I think that's always a good sign. It's got an absolute ton of features and is so versatile that it will probably fill just about any gig that you need it for. It can do vintage, 70s rock tones, it can do kind of Motown, it can do ultra modern, it can do ultra modern angry and aggressive or ultra modern kind of jazz, straight ahead, clean. It can do all of those things and more because it's got so much stuff inbuilt that you can mold it and shape it as you wish. I'll quickly run through the features, then I'll start talking about stuff in detail. It's got 3 different drive modes. It's got an overdrive, a distortion, and a fuzz. It's got 3 different preamp voicings, a classic, which is kind of like, Ampeg-ish, modern, which is kind of much more upfront and mid-focused, and flat, which is exactly what it sounds. It's dead boring. But you can mold that if you've got something like a bass with active EQ and pickups and you want to use that instead. It's got 3 band EQ, which are different bands based on whatever the preamp voicing is. The mid-frequency is scoopable, so if you've got, in my case, usually kind of a horrible low-mid honk, you can find that and dip it. It's got a 3-way knob where you can change how the power section responds, with a completely flat linear solid state style response, 6L6 which is quite low end, full and round, and 6550 which is my personal favourite, which has quite a bit of that low fullness in the valve kind of thing, but it's also quite immediate and really hits you kind of hard. It's got a compressor inbuilt as well, that's one of those one knob compressor styles. It's got so much, it's got a chorus, it's got octaves, lower octave and upper octave both inbuilt. It's got DI output, which you can switch to be a completely clean DI, or with all of this processing engaged. It's got a USB on it, which you can use as an interface. You can reamp through this without using any extra gear. It's got a speak-on output, but you can stick a jack in the middle of it, and the jack works perfectly fine. That's what I'm doing right now. You can power it without the jack at all to use it with the DI output or the USB output, just to use the preamp, so you can record at home without deafening the neighbors. It comes with a 2-button foot switch, which is on a regular guitar cable type single jack, not even a TRS, just a single jack. So you can buy a 5-button foot switch for it as well, which most people aren't going to need, but it means you can turn on and off things like the drive, the octave, the chorus, all that kind of stuff separately. So that's all something you can use with it. It's rack mountable as well, so if you're going on tour, you can have it safely away from everybody inside a rack. So much stuff. So let's start to dive in. Okay, so I switched from my super versatile Schecter Stiletto Studio 6 to the Schecter J-Bass, and this is probably going to be me tone hunting for some of my favourite sounds. Because this is super clean, this is without the compressor, this is without any drive, and suddenly we get that. That's with the response on 6550. With the response on linear, we'll get something that's got a bit more kind of substance in the mids, but doesn't have that kind of thump that I like. And the 6L6 is very round. Sounds nice, but on 6550. Bit less bloat on the low end. I think I like it. Now, this is on modern voicing, by the way. And this J-Bass has EMGs, but they're not like metal EMGs. They are single coil J-Bass style pickups, so you've got this sound. And so let's start with the overdrive. It sounds like it's blending the clean signal with that drive, which is really useful because I can still hear the top end. Although all the way to the other end on the drive, it sounds like the clean signal is now gone. That's very early Black Sabbath and quite doomy as well. If I put this on just neck pickup, I can do that kind of... Obviously, if I play with my fingers, that would be more Sabbathy. But yeah, that is a very different sound. If I bring that back to halfway, that's going to give me that clean blend again. Find a halfway point. Very cool. And the distortion is much more angular and angry and aggressive. But again, let's start from clean. Comes in a little quieter compared, but really sits underneath the main tone. And if I go up, that's got a lot of definition to it. It's got that kind of, dare I say, dark glassy kind of thing. It's got that kind of jank. If I bring the gain back so there's a clean blend, that's starting to get a little bit angry. And let's bring some low end in under that. That is a powerful EQ. But that is really starting to become my kind of sound. I use a lot of a distortion like that, but the way that I tend to work, I can play more gently. In a lot of band contexts, you wouldn't notice that distortion there anymore. Suddenly that's gone underneath the guitarist and the drummer. So I can use that to my advantage and play very gently in verses. And then really go nuts on the choruses. That kind of thing. Now let's check out the fuzz. Just to note, up till this point, everything you've heard has been this amp through an Ampeg 4x10 in the other room with a Sennheiser 421 miking that up. So a fairly classic rock kind of bass amp cab sound. So, like with the overdrive, by the time we get to full drive, the clean signal's gone. But so's all definition, so we wind that back a little and... If the clean signal is overtaking the drives at any point, we can back the gain off, the clean gain, just a little to bring the clean tone down so that they kind of blend together really well. It's nice and easy as a system, and then if it's not loud enough, turn up the master by a hair to compensate. Now that's starting to growl. And there is very definitely a noise gate inside that drive because I'm not touching this bass right now, and that full-on fuzz should be hissing like an angry cat. So it's definitely got some sort of noise filtering on that system. Now let's throw a couple of these pieces of fun in. Let's throw in the chorus on more of a mildly distorted kind of tone and not this absolute monster. It's got that classic, very obvious chorus sound about it. There is a knob on the back so I can make it less obvious as a chorus. The chorus is still on, but almost at minimum compared to... And adding a tiny little bit of chorus is something that I very often do live because it helps me to stand out in a busy mix without becoming, oh my God, it's the 80s. It's just a really nice little trick that, especially with heavy grinding bass, with heavy grinding guitars, that extra little bit of... that little bit of a chorus on top can really help you poke out. And then, of course, there's the octave. And the octave in this is an octave down and an octave up. So... which way did we go? That's with the octave up, which is quite subtle, and this is with the octave down. Which is really much more noticeable. If I turn the drive off, I'm pretty sure I can do the sledgehammer thing pretty quick. It tracks all right. There's only one or two octaves that I know of that can track better than that on a bass, and those cost a significant chunk of what this entire unit costs. If you want to go and get those, you're going to go and get those. But those are the kind of thing where you'd try this on your amp and you'd go, I kind of like an octave effect. Either this is good enough or I want the best of the best. You're going to spend extra money. Same with the chorus. So with that tiny little bit of chorus, quite a lot of drive. One thing I haven't done so far yet is use the compressor. So I'm going to turn that on now. And one knob compressors are usually not my kind of thing. They're usually quite squishy, but used gently they can really help to level things out in a live context. There we go. So I've always liked to have a gentle compressor in a bass chain, and then not too much. Generally let the front house guy sort the rest out to their taste depending on the rest of the mix. But a little bit of light compression in there can help to tame things down. I very often use a really aggressive compressor in the front, usually something like the Origin Effects Cali 76, but again they're very expensive and they're designed to do a very different thing to this kind of compressor which goes at the end of the signal chain. And of course, if that's all getting a little silly, I can knock off the chorus, turn down the drive, and suddenly I can go. Turn the drive all the way off. Having just checked the manual quickly, the 2-button foot switch that comes with the U700, one of the buttons turns on and off the drive, so you don't need to have that distortion on all the time, and the other one turns off either the chorus or the octave, depending on which one you've chosen. So the options are there for you to use those as features during the show without having to buy any more extra gear, and then not have them when it's an inconvenience or doesn't match the tone of the show. So that's kind of what I would do. I would have the drive on most of the time, but off for things like ballads, of course. So I've got that. And then the chorus, again, probably on a lot of the time for me. Or if I'm doing a show where I need an octave setting, I can have that set and then turn that on and off with my feet. Really useful. And the fact that you can then expand that to have the chorus and the octave separate, the drive and the compressor and all those kind of things separately switchable if that's what you need. Also really useful. Now I'm going to take this home quickly and we're going to play with this in Reaper using the USB output and see how far we get. All right, I am at home and I've got a pretty crazy setup going on here because obviously I have to film this at the same time, but I'm going to get a little bit video on my phone. This is the Unity 700 that's on my desk right now, plugged in with the USB cable, and it's going into ACO for all, as you have to kind of install through, as Blackstar's website says, you go get the ACO for all driver. I've set this up so that I can hear myself out of my Audient Evo interface, but I could have also set this out for the headphone output from the bass amp. Not sure quite how that would work, but also I have things routed so that this DI track of the bass is going out clean through the amp. And so I can hit play and this is coming in on a new track. And as I hit play and dial this in, we'll get some sound. So I can turn the drive off, make it flatter, which might work for this mix. Ooh. The fuzz might not be appropriate for this mix. Distortion seems to work though. As I've got this set, I've got the compressor, I've got the response, the highs, I've tuned the mids, all that kind of stuff. And now I can hit record on this and it will record it in. If I try and play it back with the mix, there is going to be some latency on there, so it's going to sound out of time. But I can go to the top of the track, hit record, and just let that record in, and we'll come back in a couple of minutes. Cool, so I'm just going to mute the original DI track and play that back in time now. Oh, hi. And this is completely without any sort of digital processing at all. This is just reamping via USB through the Unity. And it's got that really subtle chorus on there that's now full stereo, because it's a stereo chorus when you do it this way. And it's got all the original DI performance with no need to buy a reamp box, no need to do proper gain staging, no need for any other interface. It's really quite impressive. Back to me. Now, let's talk about price for a minute, because everything costs money. And having looked at the Anderton's website just now, these are currently retailing for $599 in terms of pounds, so what, $700-ish? And that's a fair amount of money if you're looking at something like this. But now the world is starting to open back up again, people are starting to tour. This could be exactly the kind of thing that you need. There are, of course, modeling options, there are other options you can do, but if you're running a modeling option, that doesn't include the power amp section, and this thing can run 3 8-ohm cabs at the same time for 700 watts, or it can run a lot of the more traditional 4-ohm based cabs at 500 watts, which is a lot, believe me. No stage I've ever played on I've needed more than 500 watts of volume for a bass amp, because at that point they start running it through the front of house and all the subs under the stage and that kind of stuff, and they tell you to turn it down a bit because they don't want it bleeding into the vocal mics too much. That also means you'll be able to turn it up as loud as you need to get the response out of the cabinet that you need without starting to hit headroom and starting to hit that sort of clipping, softening off that you get with underpowered heads. You're definitely not going to lose the loudness war in the practice room with something like this. The thing that really appeals to me is the versatility. Like, I've got, at the back there, I've got an Ampeg V4B, which is a 6L6 based amp, which is very loud and has that classic sound, but it costs more than this does, and it does one thing. I have an old Hartke bass head, which I've had since I was about 18 years old, and that's basically the flat mode with a linear response and doesn't do much else. That does that and nothing else. I've got another amp, I've got a Marshall that I can use as a bass amp, which is 6L6, and again, that's got a sound and does nothing else. I've got distortion pedals, which I've had to spend a significant amount of money on. I've got tons of gear in here, which this does all of it. I used to go to shows with a massive pedal board just to try and get close to the sound that I wanted, and then run that through an amp and cab that I was never quite happy with. And with this, I can dial in the exact power amp response, the right preamp for what I want, the right tone. And if I come back to it a year later, 2 years later, and that's not the sound that I want now, I can change it all, and it does it all well, and that's what's impressed me. I mean, I would have loved to have demoed this with their cab as well. Unfortunately, I couldn't get one in time for this video, but the head, the 700, highly recommended. Thanks everybody for watching, thanks to Blackstar for supplying this head to me, and thanks to all our patrons on Patreon for supporting me to do videos like this. It really means a lot, honestly, it's a massive thing. And thank you everybody for watching, I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.